The fluorescent lights of Memorial Hospital buzzed overhead like dying insects. I should have been dead. The doctors had told my parents I wouldn't make it through the night after the car accident on Highway 95. But here I was, 3 days later, staring at the water-stained ceiling tiles and feeling more alive than I ever had before. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Monaro's video is one you absolutely can't miss. Something was different, wrong, electric. When my best friend Madison Turner walked through that hospital door, her perfectly glossed lips curved into what everyone else would see as a concerned smile. I heard something that made my blood freeze, not with my ears, with something deeper, something that felt like a new sense I'd never known I possessed. "Thank God you're okay, Emma," she said aloud, rushing to my bedside with theatrical urgency. But underneath her words, clear as a bell, came another voice, her real voice. Damn it, why didn't she just die? This complicates everything. I blinked hard, convinced the pain medication was causing hallucinations. But when she took my hand, squeezing it with fake tenderness, the thoughts came flooding in like water through a broken dam. Jake and I were so worried, Madison continued, her blue eyes wide with manufactured concern. Inside her head, 3 more weeks. Just 3 more weeks until the trust fund kicks in on her 21st birthday. Then Jake can propose to me instead. We can be done with this charade. Jake Morrison, my boyfriend of 18 months, appeared in the doorway carrying a wilted bouquet of gas station flowers. His sandy hair was messed up like he'd been running his hands through it, something he did when he was nervous. When he saw me awake, relief washed over his handsome face. "Emma, baby, you scared us to death," he said, crossing the room in 3 quick strides. But his thoughts hit me like a slap. Christ, she looks terrible. How am I supposed to keep this up? Madison's right, this would have been so much easier if she'd just, well, if the accident had been worse. I lay there, trapped in a hospital bed, listening to the 2 people I trusted most in the world plot my emotional destruction. The irony wasn't lost on me. I nearly died in a car crash while driving to surprise Jake with dinner after finding out he'd lost his part-time job at the campus bookstore. I'd been rushing to comfort him, and instead, I'd almost died while he was planning to betray me. The ability was overwhelming at first. Their thoughts came in waves, mixing with my own consciousness, until I could barely tell where I ended and they began. But as the hours passed, I learned to tune it like a radio, focusing on specific frequencies. Madison had been my roommate since freshman year at Riverside University. We'd met during orientation week, bonding over our shared love of old movies and late-night ice cream runs. She was the kind of beautiful girl that made other girls either hate her or desperately want to be her friend. I felt lucky that she'd chosen me. Now I understand why. "I brought you your favorite magazines," Madison said, setting down a stack of glossy fashion publications on my bedside table. Her thoughts: the inheritance lawyer said the money transfers automatically on her birthday if she's alive and mentally competent. But if something were to happen before then, she'd known about my trust fund. Of course she had. My grandmother Eleanor Whitmore had been a successful real estate developer before her death 2 years ago, and she'd left me a substantial inheritance that would become available when I turned 21, just 3 weeks away. I'd mentioned it to Madison in passing, never thinking much of it. To me, it was just a safety net for after graduation. To her, apparently, it was a target. Jake sat down in the uncomfortable plastic chair beside my bed, taking my other hand. His touch, which used to send butterflies through my stomach, now felt cold and calculating. "The doctor said you'll be able to go home tomorrow," he said softly. His mind, "Good. The sooner this gets back to normal, the sooner Madison and I can execute the plan. Emma's always been too trusting, she'll never see it coming." The plan. I focused harder, trying to catch more details from his scattered thoughts. Images flashed through Jake's consciousness. Madison in his apartment, their naked bodies tangled in sheets I'd helped him pick out. Late-night phone calls where they'd laughed about my naivety. A jewelry store receipt for an engagement ring, not for me. My heart monitor started beeping faster, and both of them looked at me with concern. "Are you okay?" Madison asked, but her thoughts were purely calculating. "She better not be having complications. We need her to be healthy and unsuspecting." "Just tired," I managed to whisper, though inside I was anything but tired. I was wide awake for the first time in my life. The next few hours revealed the full scope of their betrayal. Jake had been cheating on me with Madison for 4 months. They'd planned it carefully, waiting until we were close to graduation, close to my birthday, close to the money. Madison had been feeding him information about my schedule, my passwords, my private thoughts that I'd shared with her during our late-night conversations. But it went deeper than just an affair. They'd been systematically isolating me from other friends, convincing me that I was too shy, too awkward, too dependent on them. Madison had sabotaged potential friendships by spreading rumors or manufacturing drama. Jake had discouraged me from joining clubs or activities that might introduce me to new people. They'd created a perfect little ecosystem where I depended entirely on them for social connection and emotional support. And once I inherited my grandmother's money, they planned to take it all. The trust stipulates that if she gets married before 25, her husband gains access to the principal amount, Jake's thoughts revealed. Madison found that clause when she hacked Emma's email and read the legal documents. All I have to do is propose, we get married, I divorce her and keep half, then Madison and I can finally be together openly. I closed my eyes, overwhelmed by the magnitude of their deception. Every sweet moment, every loving gesture, every time I'd confided in Madison about my insecurities, it had all been part of an elaborate con. But the most painful revelation came when I accidentally tapped into Madison's deeper memories. She'd never been my friend. Not really. From the very first day we'd met, she'd been sizing me up, calculating my worth. She'd researched me before orientation, learned about my family's money, and deliberately targeted me as a mark. She's perfect. Madison's memory echoed from that first week of college. Rich but not flashy about it. Lonely enough to be grateful for attention. Pretty enough that I won't be embarrassed to be seen with her, but not so beautiful that she'll steal my spotlight. And she's trusting. God, is she trusting? This is going to be easier than I thought. The nurse came in to check my vitals, and Madison and Jake stepped out into the hallway. Through the thin walls, I could hear their whispered conversation, and more importantly, their unguarded thoughts. She seems different, Madison murmured. More alert or something. It's probably just the shock of the accident, Jake replied. She'll be back to normal once we get her home and settled into routine again. Normal, they wanted me back to normal, back to being their victim. But I wasn't normal anymore. The accident had changed something fundamental in my brain, rewired my consciousness in a way that gave me access to the truth they'd been hiding. And with that truth came a clarity I'd never experienced before. I wasn't going to confront them. I wasn't going to cry or scream or beg for explanations. I was going to do something much more satisfying. I was going to let them think they'd won. Over the next week, as I recovered at home in my small apartment near campus, I played the part of the grateful, dependent girlfriend and best friend. I thanked Madison for taking care of me, praised Jake for being so attentive, and acted every inch the trusting fool they believed me to be. But in the quiet moments when they weren't around, I was planning. The accident had given me more than just the ability to read minds. It had given me perspective. I could see their relationship for what it truly was, a partnership built on mutual greed and a shared contempt for me. They didn't love each other any more than they loved me. They were simply using each other to get my money, and that was going to be their downfall. 3 days before my 21st birthday, Jake suggested we all go out to celebrate early. Just the 3 of us, he said with a smile that I now knew was as fake as everything else about him. Somewhere special. Madison clapped her hands together with feigned excitement. Oh, that's perfect. I know just the place, that new rooftop restaurant downtown. Very romantic. Romantic. They were planning to celebrate my birthday while secretly counting down the days until they could destroy my life. But I had news for them. The girl they'd manipulated and controlled was gone. She died in that car accident on Highway 95. The person sitting across from them now was someone else entirely. Someone who knew exactly what they were planning, and who had plans of her own. The coffee shop on Elm Street had always been our usual spot for study sessions, but now it felt like a surveillance headquarters. I sat at our regular corner table, nursing a vanilla latte, while Madison and Jake worked on their respective laptops, completely unaware that every stray thought was broadcasting directly into my consciousness. Learning to control my new ability was like trying to tune dozens of radio stations at once. At first, the mental chatter from every person in the crowded cafe had been overwhelming. Fragments of grocery lists, relationship anxieties, work stress, and random song lyrics all jumbling together in my head. But over the past week, I discovered I could focus on specific people, diving deep into their thought patterns like selecting a particular channel. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. Madison was typing what appeared to be notes for her psychology class, but her mind was elsewhere entirely. She was mentally rehearsing a conversation she planned to have with Jake later. We need to speed this up. Her thoughts formed clearly. Emma's birthday is in 2 weeks, and she's been acting strange since the accident, more observant. Yesterday she asked me why I'd never mentioned my cousin's wedding before, when I used it as an excuse to skip her study group. She never used to question things like that. I kept my expression neutral, pretending to read my marketing textbook while absorbing every detail. Madison was right. I was asking more questions now. When you could hear people's real thoughts, their lies became glaringly obvious. It was impossible to go back to blind trust. Jake's thoughts were more scattered, jumping between his upcoming economics exam and increasingly specific fantasies about what he'd do with my inheritance money. A BMW M3 in midnight blue, his mind wandered. Maybe one of those new condos in the downtown district. Madison wants to travel to Europe after graduation. Paris, Rome, that expensive shit. We could do it all once I get my hands on Emma's trust fund. What struck me most was how casually they both thought about destroying my life. There was no guilt, no second thoughts, just practical considerations about timing and execution. It was like overhearing people plan a business transaction, except the commodity being traded was my future. "Emma, you're being quiet today," Madison said, glancing up from her laptop with practiced concern. "Still feeling tired from the accident? Just thinking about my birthday," I replied honestly. "It feels surreal that I'm turning 21 soon." Jake looked up with what I now recognized as calculated interest. "Have you thought about what you want to do? We should make it special." His thoughts, perfect opening. I need to plant the seed about getting more serious. Girls love that romantic bullshit. Actually, Jake continued, reaching across the table to take my hand. "I've been thinking about us a lot since your accident, about our future together. Maybe it's time we started making some bigger plans." Madison's mental response was immediate. "Too early, you idiot. Wait until after the money clears." But outwardly, she just smiled and nodded encouragingly. "That's so sweet, Jake." "Emma, you're so lucky to have someone who's thinking long term." I squeezed Jake's hand and gave him what I hoped looked like an adoring smile. "I'd love that. What kind of plans?" The anticipation in his thoughts was nauseating. She's taking the bait. God, this is going to be easier than Madison predicted. "Well," he said, stroking my knuckles with his thumb, "maybe we could talk about moving in together after graduation, sharing our lives completely." Sharing was an interesting word choice considering he meant sharing my bank account. Over the next few days, I became a detective in my own life, using my ability to uncover the full scope of their deception. The evidence was damning. Madison had been systematically going through my belongings whenever I left our shared apartment. She'd photographed my financial documents, copied my social security number, and even made duplicate keys to my mailbox to intercept any correspondence from my inheritance lawyer. "Emma keeps the legal papers in that blue folder under her mattress," Madison's memory revealed during one of our conversations. "The trust is worth $2.8 million, plus the rental properties in 3 different states. The principal becomes accessible at 21, but there are clauses about marriage and mental competency that we need to understand better." I had no idea my grandmother's estate was worth that much. To me, it had always just been some money for college and maybe a house down payment. I'd never bothered to read the detailed documents my parents had given me when I turned 18. Madison apparently had studied them like a legal scholar. Jake's role in their partnership was becoming clearer too. While Madison handled the research and planning, he was responsible for the emotional manipulation. His job was to keep me isolated, dependent, and madly in love with him until the moment they were ready to strike. Emma's always been insecure about her looks. Jake's thoughts revealed as we walked across campus after our shared biology class. Madison taught me which buttons to push. Compliment her intelligence instead of her appearance, makes her feel unique. Act a little jealous when other guys talk to her but not too much. Make her feel like she needs to earn my attention. It was horrifying to realize how thoroughly they'd studied me, cataloging my vulnerabilities like items in a database. Every insecurity I'd ever shared with Madison had been weaponized against me. But perhaps the most chilling discovery came when I accidentally tapped into one of Madison's deeper memory streams while she was sleeping. We shared a wall between our bedrooms, and sometimes her thoughts were strong enough to penetrate my dreams. This wasn't their first con. Madison had done this before. Twice, during her senior year of high school, she'd befriended two different wealthy classmates, gained their trust, and then systematically destroyed them. One girl had ended up in therapy after Madison spread intimate secrets all over social media. The other had attempted suicide after Madison orchestrated a elaborate public humiliation involving fake love letters. Emma's different though, Madison's sleeping mind murmured. She has real money, not just daddy's credit card. This is a big score, the one that sets me up for life. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding. I wasn't just dealing with betrayal, I was dealing with a sociopath who had perfected her craft over years of practice. The next morning, I began my own research project. If Madison could study me, I could study her right back. Using my new ability, I learned things about my supposed best friend that painted a picture of someone I'd never truly known. Madison Turner wasn't even her real name. She'd legally changed it from Melissa Tate before starting college, leaving behind a trail of academic fraud and petty theft in her hometown of Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Her parents weren't wealthy art dealers living in Europe as she'd always claimed. Her father was a convicted embezzler serving time in federal prison, and her mother was a gambling addict who'd lost their house when Madison was 16. She'd been living in foster care when she aged out of the system and somehow managed to get into Riverside University on falsified transcripts. Jake's background was less dramatic but equally revealing. He came from money, old Connecticut money, but he'd been cut off by his family after dropping out of Princeton to pursue what his father called artistic dreams at a state school. His trust fund had been frozen until he proved he could graduate and hold down a real job for at least 2 years. My father thinks I'm a failure. Jake's thoughts often return to this theme. But when I show up to Christmas dinner with a rich wife and a successful business plan, he'll have to admit he was wrong. Emma's money is going to be my ticket back into the family. So Jake wasn't just after my inheritance for the lifestyle. He was trying to buy back his father's approval and his own place in high society. I was going to be his redemption arc, whether I wanted to be or not. Armed with this knowledge, I began to see their relationship more clearly. Madison and Jake weren't partners in love, they were partners in crime. And like most criminal partnerships, it was built on mutual self-interest rather than genuine trust. Madison resented having to share the profits with Jake, thinking she could have seduced me into giving her the money directly. Jake was frustrated by Madison's controlling nature and secretly planned to double-cross her once he had legal access to my funds through marriage. They were both planning to betray each other, which gave me the perfect opportunity to accelerate their mutual destruction. But first, I needed to understand exactly how they planned to take everything from me. And for that, I would need to get closer to their planning sessions, close enough to hear every detail of their scheme. 2 years had passed since that night at the Grandview Hotel, when I'd walked away from Madison and Jake's wreckage. The world looked different now from the 32nd floor of the Whitmore Foundation building in downtown Seattle. I'd moved across the country after graduation, partly for the business opportunities, but mostly because I needed space to become the person I was meant to be. The morning sun streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows as I reviewed the quarterly reports spread across my mahogany desk. The foundation had grown beyond anything my grandmother could have imagined. What started as a small scholarship program had evolved into a comprehensive support system for young women escaping toxic relationships and financial abuse. My assistant knocked on the door. "Emma, your 10 o'clock is here." Dr. Sarah Chen from the University of Washington Psychology Department. I smiled, remembering my own journey from naive college student to whatever I was now. "Send her in." Dr. Chen was a petite woman with kind eyes and an air of quiet authority. She settled into the chair across from my desk, pulling out a tablet and recorder. "Thank you for agreeing to this interview," she said. "Your foundation's work has caught the attention of researchers nationwide. The success rate of your intervention programs is unprecedented." I leaned back in my chair, considering how much to share. The mind-reading ability had faded gradually over the years, becoming more of an intuitive sense than the overwhelming flood of thoughts it once was. I'd never told anyone the full truth about how I'd gained such insight into manipulation tactics. "We focus on education," I said carefully, "teaching people to recognize the warning signs before they become victims. Your personal experience with financial manipulation, how much did that inform the Foundation's approach?" A brief flash of memory, Madison's face crumpling when I'd said no at the hotel, Jake's desperate phone calls that I'd never returned, the news articles about their subsequent arrests for identity theft and fraud against other students they'd targeted after me. "Everything," I answered honestly. "Sometimes the best way to help others is to transform your own pain into purpose." Dr. Chen nodded, making notes. "The psychological profiles your team develops are remarkably accurate. It's almost as if you can read people's intentions." I smiled at the irony. Practice makes perfect. After the interview, I walked to the large window overlooking Elliott Bay. The water sparkled in the afternoon light, ferries crisscrossing between islands. It was peaceful here, clean, far from the tangled web of lies I'd left behind in Connecticut. My phone buzzed. A text from my parents, who I now spoke with regularly after years of rebuilding our relationship. They'd been devastated when they learned about Madison and Jake's deception, blaming themselves for not seeing the signs. But I'd helped them understand that master manipulators fool everyone. That's what makes them dangerous. "Proud of you, sweetheart. Saw the article in Forbes about the Foundation's expansion to Portland. Grandma Eleanor would be amazed. Love, Mom and Dad." I typed back. She'd probably have some suggestions for improvement. "You know how she was. Love you both." The truth was, I thought about my grandmother often. Not just the wealthy businesswoman legacy I'd inherited, but the woman who'd somehow known I'd need protection from people who would try to use me. Her trust fund hadn't just been money, it had been armor, waiting for the day I'd be strong enough to wear it. A knock at my door interrupted my thoughts. "Come in." My program director, Lisa Rodriguez, entered with a thick file. "Emma, we have a new case that's unusual. A young woman from Portland who specifically requested to speak with you. She says she has information about Madison Turner." My blood went cold. I hadn't heard that name in over a year. "What kind of information?" Lisa opened the file, revealing photographs and documents. "Apparently Madison was released from prison 6 months ago. She's been targeting college students again, but now she's working with a larger network. This woman, Katie Phillips, was one of her recent victims. She lost her entire college fund." I studied the photos. Madison looked different, harder, more calculating. Prison had refined her skills rather than reforming her. She'd learned to work within a system, to be more careful, more thorough. "Katie wants to testify if we can build a case strong enough to put Madison away permanently," Lisa continued. "But she's scared. Madison threatened her family." I closed the file, my mind racing. Part of me wanted to stay safely insulated in my new life, to let law enforcement handle it. But another part, the part that remembered what it felt like to be helpless and manipulated, knew I couldn't turn away. "Schedule a meeting with Katie," I said, "and contact our legal team. If Madison is building a network, we need to stop it before more people get hurt." That evening, I walked along the waterfront, processing the news. The ability to read thoughts might have faded, but my understanding of human nature had only sharpened. Madison wasn't the type to give up after one failure. She'd view prison as education, a chance to learn from other criminals and perfect her techniques. The meeting with Katie Phillips took place the following week in the Foundation's secure conference room. She was 20, blonde, and carried herself with the brittle confidence of someone trying to appear stronger than they felt. I recognized the posture. I'd worn it myself once. "Madison befriended me during freshman orientation," Katie began, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "She seemed so sophisticated, so worldly. She said she could help me get into the exclusive sororities and introduce me to the right people." The story was achingly familiar. Madison had updated her methods but kept the core strategy the same: identify vulnerable targets, gain their trust, isolate them from support systems, then strike when they were most dependent. She convinced me to consolidate my college savings into a joint investment account, Katie continued. Said she had insider information about tech stocks. When I tried to withdraw my money, the account was empty. She'd moved everything to offshore accounts I couldn't trace. How much? I asked gently. $60,000. My grandfather's life insurance money that was supposed to get me through college. Katie's composure finally cracked, tears spilling down her cheeks. I'm working 3 jobs now just to pay for next semester. I handed her tissues, my heart aching for this girl who reminded me so much of my former self. You're not the only one, are you? Katie shook her head. There are at least 6 others that I know of. Madison has a whole system now. Fake investment companies, shell corporations, even a fake boyfriend who plays the same role Jake did with you. So Madison had learned from our encounter. She'd realized that working alone made her vulnerable, that she needed a more sophisticated operation to avoid the mistakes that had landed her in prison. Will you help us? Katie asked. Your foundation is the only organization with enough resources to take on something this big. I looked at this brave young woman who'd survived Madison's latest scheme and found the courage to fight back. She reminded me that my story wasn't really about revenge. It was about protection, about making sure other people didn't have to experience what we'd been through. Yes, I said, we'll help. Over the next 6 months, the Whitmore Foundation led a multi-state investigation that exposed Madison's network and helped recover nearly $500,000 stolen from dozens of young victims. Madison and her accomplices were arrested and charged with federal fraud crimes that would keep them in prison for the next decade. But the real victory wasn't Madison's conviction. It was watching Katie Phillips testify with confidence and strength, no longer the frightened girl who'd walked into my office. It was seeing the other victims find their voices and rebuild their lives. It was knowing that my grandmother's money had been transformed into something that protected instead of attracting predators. On a quiet Sunday evening, I sat in my apartment overlooking Puget Sound, reading a letter from one of the foundation's scholarship recipients. She was a first-generation college student studying psychology, hoping to work with abuse survivors. Her essay had moved me to tears. She wrote about transforming trauma into triumph, about using pain as fuel for helping others. I set the letter aside and picked up a framed photo from my desk, the only picture I had of my grandmother and me together, taken when I was 8 years old. We were in her garden, both covered in soil, laughing at something I couldn't remember. I think I finally understand what you were trying to teach me, I said to her. Money isn't power. Knowledge is power. And the greatest power is knowing how to protect yourself and others from people who would use your kindness against you. The mind-reading ability was completely gone now, but I didn't miss it. I'd learned to read people in other ways, through their actions, their inconsistencies, their tells. More importantly, I'd learned to trust my instincts and set boundaries that no amount of charm or manipulation could cross. My phone rang, displaying my parents' number. I answered with a smile. Hi, Mom. Emma, sweetheart, did you see the news? They're doing a feature story about the foundation on 60 Minutes next month. I saw. Pretty surreal, right? Your grandmother would be so proud, my mother said, her voice thick with emotion. Not just of what you've accomplished, but of who you've become. You've taken everything terrible that happened and turned it into something beautiful. After we hung up, I walked out onto my balcony, breathing in the salt air and watching the lights of the city twinkle below. The girl who'd almost died in a car crash on Highway 95 felt like a character from someone else's story now. That girl had been trusting to a fault, dependent on others for validation, willing to sacrifice her own intuition to maintain relationships that were slowly destroying her. This woman, the one I'd become, was different, stronger, more careful, but not closed off. I had a small circle of genuine friends who'd earned my trust through consistency and time. I had work that mattered, resources to help others, and most importantly, the unshakable knowledge that I could survive anything. The accident hadn't just given me the ability to read minds, it had given me a second chance at life. And I'd used that chance to become someone my grandmother would be proud of, someone who could protect others from the predators who'd once seen me as easy prey. I was finally completely, gloriously free, and tomorrow, I'd use that freedom to help someone else find theirs. The following morning brought an unexpected visitor. Rebecca Martinez, the FBI agent who'd led the investigation into Madison's network, stood in my office lobby holding 2 cups of coffee and wearing an expression I couldn't quite read. "Emma, do you have a few minutes? There's something we need to discuss." We settled into the comfortable seating area by the windows, and Rebecca set down a thick manila envelope between us. "Madison Turner made a request from federal prison," she began. "She wants to meet with you, face to face." The coffee suddenly tasted bitter. Why would she think I'd agree to that? She claims she has information about other criminal networks, targeting young women with inherited wealth, says she'll only share it with you. Rebecca leaned forward. Her lawyer is arguing it could help prevent future crimes. I stared out at the Seattle skyline, considering the implications. Madison had always been calculating, but this felt different. More desperate. "What's your assessment?" I asked. Rebecca sighed. "Honestly, I think she's playing another angle, but the information she's hinting at could be legitimate. We've identified similar patterns in Chicago, Miami, and Phoenix. If there's a larger network, you want me to be bait. I want you to be informed before you make a decision. You've built something incredible here, Emma, but Madison Turner represents unfinished business for you, doesn't she?" That evening, I called my therapist, Dr. Amanda Cross, who'd helped me process the trauma of discovering my best friend's betrayal. We'd worked together for 2 years, and she'd guided me through the complex emotions of rebuilding trust in myself and others. "What does your intuition tell you, Doctor?" Cross asked during our emergency session. "Madison doesn't give information away for free. She wants something from me, and meeting her face to face would give her the opportunity to manipulate me again. And yet you're considering it." I was quiet for a long moment. "There's a part of me that wants closure. Not revenge, I'm past that, but understanding. I want to know if she ever felt any genuine friendship toward me, or if I was always just a mark. Would knowing that change anything about your life now?" "No," I admitted, "but it might help me understand how to better protect the young women who come to our foundation. If I can see how Madison operates up close, maybe I can teach others to recognize those patterns." 3 weeks later, I found myself in the sterile visiting room of FCI Dublin, a federal women's prison in California. Madison sat across from me at a metal table, separated by reinforced glass. She looked older, thinner, but her eyes held the same sharp intelligence I remembered. She picked up the phone, and I reluctantly did the same. "Emma," she said, and for a moment, her voice carried an echo of the friend I'd thought I knew. "You look good, successful. What do you want, Madison?" "Straight to business. I always admired that about you, when you finally stopped being naive." She leaned back in her chair. "I want to make a deal. I'm listening. There's a man named Victor Castellanos. He's been recruiting women like me, intelligent, attractive, morally flexible, to target wealthy families across the country. He has detailed profiles on hundreds of potential victims, including psychological assessments and financial records." My blood chilled. "How detailed?" "Your name was on his list, Emma. So were the names of at least 50 other young women with significant inheritances. He's been building this network for 5 years, and I was just one small part of it." The phone felt heavy in my hand. "Why are you telling me this?" Madison's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something that might have been genuine regret. "Because what we did to you was supposed to be a one-time thing. Jake and I were desperate and stupid, and we thought we could take your money and disappear. But Victor, he's industrialized it. He's turning financial manipulation into a systematic business model. What kind of deal are you proposing?" "I testify against Victor and provide everything I know about his operation. In exchange, you advocate for a reduced sentence and help me get transferred to a minimum security facility." I studied her face, looking for the tells I'd learned to recognize. "And what makes you think I'd help you after everything you did?" "Because despite what you think, Emma, I did care about you. Maybe not the way a real friend should have, but you weren't just a mark to me. You were—" She paused, searching for words. "You were the person I might have been if I'd made different choices." The admission hung between us like a bridge. Neither of us was sure we wanted to cross. "I need to think about it," I said finally. The offer has an expiration date. Victor's planning something big for next month, a coordinated attack on multiple targets. If we don't stop him soon, dozens of women are going to lose everything. I left the prison with more questions than answers. The drive back to San Francisco gave me time to process what Madison had revealed. If she was telling the truth, my experience wasn't an isolated incident, but part of a much larger criminal enterprise. That night, I called Rebecca Martinez, set up a meeting with the federal prosecutor. I want to hear more about Victor Castellanos. The briefing took place in a secure conference room at the FBI field office. The walls were covered with photographs, financial charts, and interconnected web diagrams that looked like something from a conspiracy thriller. Victor Castellanos is 42 years old, born in Argentina, educated at Wharton. Agent Martinez began. On paper, he's a legitimate financial consultant with clients across 3 countries. In reality, he's running the most sophisticated wealth extraction scheme we've ever encountered. She pointed to a map dotted with red pins. His network has successfully defrauded victims of over $12 million in the past 3 years. The women he recruits are carefully selected for specific psychological profiles, intelligent enough to be convincing, desperate enough to be compliant, and attractive enough to gain their target's trust. The photographs on the wall showed women who could have been Madison's sisters, polished, beautiful, confident. But now I could see the desperation beneath their smiles, the calculated emptiness in their eyes. What makes him different from other financial scammers? I asked. Patience and research, another agent replied. His teams spend months, sometimes years, building relationships with their targets. They create elaborate backstories, fake families, even staged meet-cutes that seem completely natural. By the time they make their move, the victims are so emotionally invested that they hand over their money willingly. The scope of it was staggering. Madison and Jake's scheme had been amateurish by comparison. 2 desperate college students looking for quick money. This was organized crime at its most sophisticated level. If Madison cooperates, what kind of case can you build against him? I asked. With her testimony and the documentation she's offering, we could potentially dismantle the entire network. But we need her to be credible, and given her history, you need someone to vouch for her character. We need someone he would see as a legitimate threat. Someone with the resources and motivation to expose him publicly if the legal system fails. I understood now why Madison had specifically requested to meet with me. It wasn't just about getting a reduced sentence, it was about positioning herself as valuable enough to the prosecution that they'd take her seriously. I want full access to the case files, I said. If I'm going to advocate for Madison, I need to understand exactly what we're dealing with. 3 days later, I sat in my foundation office surrounded by boxes of evidence. The scope of Victor's operation was breathtaking in its cruelty. His victims weren't just wealthy young women, they were specifically targeted based on psychological vulnerabilities. Recent deaths in the family, history of depression, social isolation, academic pressure, all factors that made them more susceptible to manipulation. One file particularly caught my attention. Sarah Chen, age 19, from Portland. Her parents had died in a car accident, leaving her a substantial life insurance settlement. Victor's team had targeted her just 6 months after the funeral, when she was still grieving and vulnerable. According to the reports, a young man named David had accidentally bumped into her at a coffee shop near her community college. He'd been charming, understanding about her loss, and slowly worked his way into her life. Within 4 months, he'd convinced her to invest her inheritance in a fake cryptocurrency venture. She'd lost everything, and attempted suicide when she realized she'd been conned. Sarah had survived, but barely. She was now working 2 minimum-wage jobs to pay for therapy and basic living expenses. Her dreams of college education destroyed. I closed the file and reached for my phone. Rebecca Martinez answered on the first ring. "I'll do it," I said. "I'll advocate for Madison's cooperation agreement, but I have conditions." "Name them." "First, any money recovered from Victor's operation goes directly to victim restitution. Second, Madison serves her time in a facility that offers genuine rehabilitation programs, not just reduced security. And third, she has to personally apologize to every victim she helped target, not as part of a legal proceeding, but as part of her rehabilitation process. Those are reasonable terms. What changed your mind?" I looked at the photograph of Sarah Chen clipped to her case file, a bright-eyed teenager who'd trusted the wrong person at the worst possible time. Because this isn't about Madison anymore. It's about stopping a predator who's industrialized heartbreak for profit. The cooperation agreement was signed 2 weeks later. Madison would testify against Victor Castellanos in exchange for a reduced sentence and transfer to a federal facility in Oregon that specialized in rehabilitative programs for white-collar criminals. But as I prepared to leave California after the final legal meeting, I realized something had shifted in me during this process. Confronting Madison hadn't given me the closure I'd expected. Instead, it had shown me how much I'd already grown beyond the need for her validation or apology. The girl she'd manipulated was gone, replaced by a woman who understood that some people would always see kindness as weakness and trust as opportunity. But rather than making me cynical, this knowledge had made me more strategic in my compassion. I thought about my grandmother Eleanor as the plane lifted off from San Francisco, carrying me home to Seattle and the work that was waiting there. She'd built her business empire by being both generous and discerning, helping those who deserved it while protecting herself from those who would exploit her kindness. Now I understood that inheritance wasn't just about money. It was about wisdom, boundaries, and the courage to use your resources to build something larger than yourself. The Whitmore Foundation would continue to grow, and Madison Turner would fade into the background of my story. But the lessons learned from both my betrayal and my recovery would echo forward, protecting other young women from predators who saw their hearts as target practice. That was the real victory, not defeating my enemies, but transforming their weapons into shields for others. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.